Can you brand a country? Why does a country need a brand? Well, I delve into these questions and more with the head of Australia's nation brand, Fiona de Jong. Fiona de Jong, welcome to the podcast and to Lend-Lease HQ here at Barangaroo.
Thanks, delighted to be here.
Well, it's really good. It's a good day to be doing a podcast because it is absolutely pelting with rain outside.
Yeah.
And I'm still feeling a little soggy, so I hope you're a little drier.
2 hours ago, I was a drowned rat. I share your pain.
Yeah. So look, wonderful to have you here. Lots to talk about. Australia has just launched its new brand, and I just thought it was a wonderful opportunity to sort of bring you in here and talk a little bit about what that means and how it's all gone. So the fact that you're still standing is quite remarkable. I know it was quite an effort, so congratulations. Before we start, I think we should probably acknowledge with the rain, quite a lot of flooding going on in northern New South Wales and Queensland. A lot of people are going through some trying times in Australia at the moment, which, after a pandemic and bushfires and whatever else is pretty tough on them. So, all the best wishes out to everyone who's going through that at the moment, and hopefully we'll be through that soon. And of course, we should also acknowledge that in Europe right now, things are a little bit more tense than normal with what's going on in Ukraine, and that's worrying the world. So I think just at the beginning of the podcast, I want to acknowledge that and basically just admit that this is something that's going on in the world, and we should recognize it. So anyway, that aside, so here we are, Australia's nation brand. Before we get into
slightly lighter
topic
context,
than that, but I just thought it was important we should recognize these things.
Yeah.
Before I get into it, you have had a fascinating background, right? And we've talked a bit about it over the last few months and when we first met. So you're now doing this Australia brand thing, but you've had quite a deep, sort of journey to this point. How did you end up in this position?
Yeah, like when did I wake up and decide I want to be head of Australia's nation brand?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, good question.
That's actually a better question than my very long-winded question.
I can assure you I didn't. Let's go back to the beginning. I think, first of all, I would say I know I've been incredibly privileged to enjoy a rich and diverse career that I never would have anticipated. I grew up on the outskirts of Brizzy, living an outdoor kind of lifestyle. I swam in the Moggle Creek that would be a little swollen right now, rode my BMX bikes and ran the mountain trails. So a really great country outdoor living that I think was the seed for my love of what was then ultimately a sport, triathlon, that I didn't even know existed at the time. And then my parents gifted us with, access to a great education. They're not things that I take for granted. In many countries around the world, children don't enjoy safety, let alone the opportunity to play sports and get a good education. I went to study law and IT with ambitions of being a great IT lawyer. Yeah, like
law and IT.
I know.
Really?
Well, it's very deliberate because everyone was studying like arts law, commerce law, the real straighty 180. And I'm like, there's this internet thing that kind of might be a thing one day. So let's, when they zig, you zag, do something a little different. So I very deliberately did a pretty weird combination, and it turned out to be, a great asset because lawyers generally don't know anything about tech, and tech heads talk a different language to the lawyers. So much of my legal career was playing translator between the tech heads and the lawyers.
I mercilessly tease my friends who are lawyers just about the fact that they're lawyers.
Yeah,
I'm going to refrain from doing that.
Yeah,
right
so
now.
A former lawyer, I'm allowed to do it.
Reformed.
But not,
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So the great thing about law is it teaches you a really good discipline in how to communicate. You work damn hard, so a strong, hard work ethic is important to learn early in your career. I had some great managers, and it was at the time of the dot-com boom where having an understanding of technology, how it can help lawyers be more efficient was one part of it, but then ultimately the practice of how you apply traditional laws to new and emerging technology, which was kind of the creative area of law, as I called it. Like there weren't laws that you had to comply with. You had to kind of make it up and go, well, we could do this with faxes, so it's no different from an email. So it was creative law, let's call it that.
Wow, I like that.
That being said, pretty quickly I figured out that I'm not sure I really wanted to be a lawyer forever because one, I really enjoyed people more than paper, and there's a lot of paper in law. Two, I kind of wanted to do the deals rather than document them. That's kind of where I got my energy. And third, I actually think you need to have a bit of a negative disposition and a willingness to see the worst in humanity and then draft a nice clause to care for, to address that. And I've got a positive optimism around
That's
the
so
world.
true, isn't it? You have to sort of, what is a contract?
Yeah, and you need to
is-
contemplate everything that could go wrong and then make sure it's covered. That's your role as a lawyer.
And very important, by the way. I mean,
Yeah.
contracts in business are critical, but
It's
that is exactly
necessary.
the outlook, right?
Yeah, correct. So I kind of understood that and went, well, I can jump to the tech side and use my legal skills in the tech world during the dot-com boom. So I jumped in-house and worked with an extraordinary group of people who I still remain in touch with, which is basically project managing the legal aspects of taking transactions online for banks, like back in the day, something we take for granted now, but it was kind of revolutionary at the time, which was really interesting work. And what I found I loved about that was the project management methodology and being part of a team that took something from beginning to end and actually like achieved something, did something, whereas the legal process was a bit kind of transactional in and out. So I loved being part of a team, and that project management, ticking things off the task list kind of played to my personality. So then I thought, I've kind of got these skills, but I wonder if I could apply it to an industry that I really deeply care about, which for me had been sport. When I was at university, I found my way into the sport of triathlon.
Which sounds exhausting, by the way. Triathlon. Like whenever I've watched it, I think.
Yeah,
wow,
the training regime was pretty hectic.
There's something to be said for the discipline that goes into being
Definitely, which is what I liked. You can't ever be great at all three, so you have to kind of flog yourself to try to be as good as you can. Like you're never actually on top of it. Your swim might be great, but your run's not. So, and then when I was at university, an event that we can all relate to, which was the moment when a Spanish man said 5 words, which is the winner is Sydney. And I remember that moment, the very moment I heard that. I was literally on the blocks before a swimming training session. And in that heartbeat of a moment, I made the decision, I want to make the Australian team. And I didn't know if it would be in triathlon or another sport at that stage, because triathlon was not on the Olympic program at that stage. And I didn't tell my coach, I didn't tell my parents. I told no one about this secret promise I'd made myself, which was I want to represent my country in sport. And so I just put my head down, bum up, trained my ass off. Like my schedule was ridiculous. I would study, have lectures 6 hours a day, train 6 hours a day, do my own study 6 hours and sleep 6 hours, like discipline, regimented. But I was really focused on what I wanted to achieve. I wanted to graduate with honours. I had an academic scholarship and I wanted to be on the Australian triathlon team. So I worked hard to achieve that. So I did kind of fell my way onto, my first team was a university team actually for Australia. And I'm like, I think they've made a mistake by selecting me. But anyway, I'll take the benefit of that.
Yeah.
And I'm still friends with the people from that very first team. That's what sport is. You get friends all across the world. And in that first race though, I didn't perform anywhere near as well as what I thought, because Australia was generally quite good in triathlon compared to the rest of the world, but not me. It wasn't like I came near to last. I came dead set last out of the entire world of university triathletes, like last. I was so embarrassed and ashamed by that performance that I had to make a decision. Do I call it quits, dude? You're never going to be any good at this, or do I just revisit my plan and actually double down on my training regime and get really disciplined? So I chose the latter path and then went on to make the Australian team's first age groups. And then it went on to the program, the Olympic program for Sydney 2000.
So you were at the Olympics in 2000?
So I didn't get selected. At the time, I think in the top 10 in the world, women, I think Australians were the top 6.
Right.
So it was harder to make the Australian team than it was any other country.
Yeah.
But they absolutely chose the right girls.
Yeah. But the discipline that would have taken to even get close.
Yeah, and that's what
in a sport like that.
That's what sport for me teaches me and many other athletes. You have to carry a discipline, a motivation, a self-motivation. Yes, you compete against your competitors, but you're also out there. And it's something I saw, obviously, from my work in the Olympics.
So I was just wondering about that. So did that prepare you that whole process of becoming an athlete, of going through the process of trying to make the team, almost making a team. Did that prepare you for a life in administrative sport?
Absolutely.
Because that is a real cutthroat place. I mean, I was sort of watching some of the background to
It does.
administrative
I think
sport.
for any,
It's a contact sport, really, isn't it?
Well, I think for any career, you need to have that hard work ethic. Like, there's no easy way to the top. You need to be willing to put in the hard work, the late nights, the cross time zones, being able to push through when you're exhausted. Like, you see a lot of athletes that carry attributes that are equally important to be successful in any career. So definitely that was a part of what shaped who I am and my leadership approach. So yes, just to complete the story then, so I had that triathlon going on in my university days. I kind of had this sporty spice and professional spice, two different kind of, parts to my demeanour. And that was where I thought, well, I wonder if I can combine these.
The sporty spice image isn't quite fitting for me. We're watching you sit here right now.
Sporty spice, posh spice and smart spice.
I'm trying to remember them now.
Yeah. Yes. So that was where I kind of was able to combine, and I spoke to a lot of people that worked in sport to go, well, are there actually real jobs in sport? Like, obviously I could be a sports lawyer, but I kind of thought I quickly figured out athletes probably didn't have any money, so I'm not sure there was a real profession in that. So yeah, and that's where I was. I started my journey with the Australian Olympic Committee. I volunteered with my local triathlon club. I spoke to a lot of people. And then I was really fortunate at the AOC that they were willing to connect the dots on my background and experience. At the time, a large part of the job was writing the selection criteria for the Olympic team members. So being a lawyer and having been through that personally helped inform the way that I wanted to make it a really fair, transparent process that if you're good, you'll get selected, not based on any bias. So I'm particularly proud of the work that we did that's probably held up as one of the best practice selection models for how you pick your Olympic teams. The other part of the role was obviously it's a huge project, managing and preparing and sending an Olympic team. So the project management methodology that I spent years in finance doing was equally great. The AOC at the time wasn't particularly strong in the tech space, so having worked in tech and e-com was a really nice asset.
So I can see it all coming together.
Yeah, it was kind of accumulation, a bit like, Steve Jobs says at the time you don't know you're accumulating these skills, but there comes a point where you look back and go, every one of them helped contribute.
Sense.
Yeah. So, and then I spent 12 years with the AOC, 10 Olympic Games, 3 summer, 3 winter, 4 youth Olympic Games. And over that journey, helped about 1,600 Australian athletes really pursue their Olympic dreams.
Wow.
And that was always the most rewarding part of it for me, was being part of an extraordinary journey, the best of the best in Australia and in the world, and helping them achieve their life goals. Or at least in the sporting attribute. So being part of that high performance environment and seeing people push the limits on the very best. And that's what the Olympics is about. It's the best of the best. How do you break the records? How do you break the Olympic records and set new records? And playing in that space was deeply aligned to who I am and what I strive for, which is excellence and happiness and health. And it aligns with all 3 of those.
They're sort of good values for a modern Australia in a way, if you think about it, those 3 things. I mean, I think it's interesting watching Australia respond to Olympic Games generally. There is a great feeling of unity that comes around an Australian team when it goes.
There's a galvanising effect that it has.
We love sort of Olympic heroes that have been created, even if they aren't Australian. I think sometimes of Eric the Eel during 2000, this swimmer who trained in a hotel swimming pool, could really barely swim more than a primary school student or something like that, and yet the whole country galvanized support for him.
Correct.
I think of the most recent games, the mullet sprinter, I've forgotten his name. He was a unifying force as well. A Sydney University student who sort of was pursuing his dream. So many sort of heroic stories.
Correct.
We had a curling team at the last.
I know,
Winter
how
Olympics,
awesome were they?
Which was very interesting, right?
So
There
And
is
it is, and that's
something
what
to
the
that.
Olympics is about. It's this celebration of the best of humanity, and you do see the whole world come together, which is relevant at a time like now where we can so easily kind of fall apart. But the Olympic Village is a collection of 205 countries from all over the world. They live together, they train together, they sleep together. Well, hopefully don't sleep together, but they
Wow.
live together in harmony for that 2-week period. And it is beautiful to see that diversity of the world come together in one little bubble. And that's the Olympics is, it's more than a sporting event because it represents the best of humanity. And that's an illustration of it.
Well, you made a comment earlier just before the podcast about the fact that, if you can come together for 2 weeks and get along for 2 weeks from across the world, then that surely is a marker for how we should be able to get together in international affairs more generally.
I'll share
I think there's something to be said for that. Yeah.
Look, there is. We're human beings. The human side of this is something a little game I used to play with myself in the Olympic Village, which was week 1. All the countries are all a little bit, shy and standoffish. And in the dining hall is where everyone congregates because everyone obviously eats. Yeah. And
Always,
week 1, you see like all the countries kind of sit together. So you've got the Americans, and then you've got the Chinese, and then you've got the Australians, and you've got the Pacific Islands, and like everyone kind of sits at the same tables. You know how far it is through the games, week 1 or week 2, based on the tracksuits in the dining hall. Week 1, they're rainbows of colours, yeah? Everyone kind of sits together. By week 2, it's this kaleidoscope.
Yeah, so people have met each other.
It's a really visual way of seeing that friendships and the diversity of the world that comes and becomes this melting pot of human beings here to achieve their dreams. It's a remarkable, unique place. But it is for me, that was always a visual reminder of what we're part of.
Well, another example, I think of the Italian and Qatari high jumpers who ended up sharing the gold medal.
Yeah.
And which I didn't think was possible, by the way, but apparently in high jump that's a thing. And the debate around that, one, it was a great sign of friendship between two great friends representing their countries. Another was, well, the competition should sort of, somebody should win the gold medal.
Yep.
Look, to be honest, I think I'm on the side of they were both equally good.
Yeah,
share
the
the
same.
medal.
The more gold medalists in the world, the better.
And the fact that it was Italy and Qatar it's quite different countries. I thought it was a nice unifying force, but perhaps that's just a bit of nostalgia. I'm not sure.
No, but I mean, the vision of the Olympic movement is articulated as making the world a better place through sport. And sport can be a prism through which we experience the world in all of its good and bad. So there's moments where politics does get into sport, but there's equally moments where North and South Korea march in the opening ceremony together. Yeah. And yet they're divided.
Which is extraordinary, isn't it?
In other contexts. Another illustration of that was Rio 2016, when we knew the plight of the refugees out of Syria conflict just then. And we established an Olympic refugee team. They were young, talented athletes that had every right and reason to be able to pursue their Olympic dreams, but they were stateless because they couldn't live in their home country and they were refugees in another country. But we found a way, again, creative lawyering, found a way to make them able to compete. And I tell you, they were rock stars in the Olympic Village because of the adversity that they overcome to pursue their goals. And
it's like the East Timorese, just before the formation of East Timor, I think, marched in front of the Australian team, if I remember correctly, because Australia had sort of taken them to the Olympics and were a form of protection, I suppose. I don't know what the word is, but that was just amazing. Like, how excited they were to be at the Olympic Games and the amount of international support for the world's newest country, I thought was a fantastic moment of politics and sport coming together for good. And even the most recent games, you had the Russians competing under Olympic flag as opposed to their national flag. But the fact that those Russian athletes were able to achieve some of the heights that they did, and particularly the gymnastics teams were extraordinary. I thought that was a sign of what is possible when you do meet in an avenue like that.
Yeah, correct.
Perhaps unsurprisingly. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I think it's equally a platform upon which countries can present themselves to the world. So in Beijing 2008, it was their coming out to the West kind of celebration that we can we can do incredible events and we can deliver, gifts to the world. Sochi, was a different thing. London was around redevelopment of, the East End of London. So every country has the opportunity to use the Olympics as a vehicle by which they achieve a domestic or an international outcome.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the London Games. I mean, Lend-Lease was involved there in London.
Of course.
We have a tremendous amount of experience in athletes' villages, generally in creation of new parts of cities, and so that's really Olympic
So
Games.
you ought to
are
blame
about
if our rooms were not big enough in the Olympic villages.
Well, probably.
What many people don't know is the athletes have to share.
Yeah.
So it's all shared accommodation, and who you get partnered with is actually pretty important when everyone's a VIP and everyone wants to,
Yes.
achieve their best performance. So.
And I just love the Japanese example of recyclable furniture that was used, and that was, again, we'll get to this later on in the discussion because I want to get to it eventually, is, around how do you modernize the games and how do you make it more economically sustainable to put on. And I mean, these are all very important debates in these era of large budget deficits and significant budget debts at a governmental level. Like in Australia is an example, and we're not even close to where the national average is. But before we get to that, I mean, this question of Australia's brand.
Yes.
Because
that was a very long way of answering your question.
No, it was great.
So we got to the Olympics, and
we got to the Olympics.
Yeah,
we're going to go to Australia's brand.
We did 12 years in the Olympics, and then there was this. Okay, well, I've promoted Australia in one sector, sport. Then my role was then to do that more broadly across all sectors in that international environment, and the time I'd spent in those international environments through sport. Give you a really lived experience around how the world does see Australians. And you are representing your country when you're in a forum with, leaders from other National Olympic committees, in my case. And it was a really unique experience to allow me to look at how Australia is seen by the world, and does that align with who we want to be, not only now, but in the future. When you look at our place in the global economy in particular. Let me illustrate it this way, perhaps. So hence I started to do this work on the nation brand.
On the nation brand.
Yep. Yeah. So people are very often kind of like, well, what is nation branding?
Yeah.
What does that actually mean? So I'm going to do this in the easiest way. I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to say the top 3 things that come to mind, yeah? All right, I'll say the name of a country, and you'll tell me the first 3 things that come to mind, yeah? So Italy, top 3.
Pasta, Tuscany, Lake Como.
Okay, good. So 2 places and 1 product. Switzerland.
Chocolate, milk chocolate, cows and watches.
Watches?
Yes.
Was cows your number 2?
I don't know. I went to a field when I was a kid, so that's what I remember about Switzerland.
Okay.
Hills and cows.
All right. Brazil.
Javianas, football, and dancing.
Okay. So that illustrates
the strangest
for
game
me.
show I've ever paid.
No, but it's really good. So if I was to say Australia to someone who was in another country in the world, chances are they're going to say something like beautiful peaches, lovely, warm and welcoming people, and furry, unique, cuddly animals, either kangaroos or koalas. That's kind of about as best as we get in terms of the rest of the world.
They wouldn't say Opera
Australia.
House.
Maybe.
They wouldn't say bridge. No?
Maybe depends. So, of course, your perceptions of a country are informed by your personal experience as well as what you see on the news and kind of the bump effect when the rest of the world bumps into you. And sport is very often an avenue by which we do bump into other countries, as is, arts, but also if the sharks are eating English people when they're here, that kind of informs it.
Well, so just a silly story here, but I never really thought much about it. I grew up in Hong Kong, so I didn't really thought much about Australia until we came on holiday here in 1991. And so, of course, it was koalas, it was indigenous culture. It was, I don't think beach really featured in it back then.
Okay.
We landed in Cairns and we saw beaches and whatever, and then we drove to, we drove sort of to Melbourne, and sort of like a wide open space coming from Hong Kong. Wide open space was our thing.
The open blue skies is something that's
But there were a lot of Australians live in Hong Kong, as you know, right? So the number one thing that I used to associate being a teenager growing up was Foster's.
Foster's.
Because
Embarrassing.
that was the beer, right? That's the
Beer and
Australian beer.
thongs.
It was the flag was on there, and of course, when I actually moved to Australia for university, and realized that Foster's actually doesn't exist in Australia.
Well, we don't drink it.
And
Yeah.
we don't drink it. And it's like, oh, okay. So that's
But we do eat
brand
Vegemite.
thing. Oh, and of course rugby, because of rugby sevens.
Yeah.
Right? The Australians will always play rugby sevens.
So how the rest of the world perceives us is sometimes random and sometimes can be more staged and more deliberate. So in the countries that we spoke about, Switzerland, Italy, and Brazil, you're able to name a product that each of those countries produced: Havianas, pasta, watches and chocolate. Yeah. The trouble with Australia is very often people are can only associate with tourism offerings. So it's anchored deeply in one sector, which is dangerous for a global, an economy to be anchored so heavily, its reputation, in one sector. So Australia's a great place for me to go on holidays, but I'd never think of buying an Australian product or service. And in a global economy, particularly in the emerging sectors, if we want to continue to be relevant to the global marketplace, we need to be known for having capabilities in those areas and sectors beyond Foster's beer.
Yeah, which is actually not a product that Australia really drinks itself.
I don't know, do we still own it?
Well, I don't know, actually. I don't know the answer. We may not.
Yeah, we should probably.
Is it Carlton United? I don't know.
Yeah, I suspect so.
It might be.
We'll have to Google that.
I'll have to Google that.
All right. I'm sure someone listening to this will be appalled that we don't know that.
Yeah.
But what it does is it anchors us in one sector, but if we want to continue to be part of that global economy, we need to be known for more good things, which we do have capability.
What are the good things? Like, so for example, I think of, as an Australian now, 25 years, 23 years, whatever it is, obviously there's places. So I'm a guy who works around cities, right? So for me, place is important. But are we not known for excellent agriculture? When I was in government, that was a number one thing. When we would travel to the Middle East, people would be very interested in our agricultural products. Are we not known for services? Are we not known for what are those things that we are actually known for?
Yep. So of course it depends. Every country has a different view of Australia. So if you're a highly educated Swedish person, it might be different to someone who hasn't had access to education in Kazakhstan. So you do need to do the market and sector analysis, but generally speaking, if I was to say what the research says,
our target markets would be our target trading partners, right?
Correct.
What would the thought process be?
Correct. So we are definitely known for our food and agriculture, but within that sector, we're also seen to very much be a premium offering. So our standard of living and cost of production are high by way of comparison to some other countries.
Sure.
So if people are going to pay a premium price, they need to associate that product comes from a premium, offering. So having those high quality manufacturing standards is something that we're definitely known for across all sectors. We're also known to be very trusted business partners, which works across all sectors, services or products. If we have a contract, we're going to do what we say we're going to do. Yeah. And we have a legal system that will enforce. If you say you're going to do something, we can enforce it, that you'll do it. And if you don't, you'll be in trouble, or there'll be consequences.
It's interesting you say that. Like I spent the week talking about our Foreign Investment Review Board with a potential client. And they come from a country that should have absolutely no concerns at all about the Foreign Investment Review Board. But because of a series of decisions that were made in 2017, this is in the tech space, the digital space, they are concerned. And so one of the things they said to me is, look, other countries, their regulators, they talk to us, we're welcomed with open arms. Here, we're just not sure. Like, we don't know, is it going to be A, B, or C? And the government here will say to me, well, like they're most welcome, right? There's complete transparency now, and that's true. I think things are much better now than they were, say, 5 years ago.
Correct.
But the fact that those decisions happened 5 years ago is still stuck in the minds of some foreign investors and some board members in those investors. And to change it is really hard.
It takes such a long time. And that's the thing. It is a long game to shift this perception of our country. So what you've said is exactly the case in point. what people are thinking is going to be informed by the policies that were made. Now, what I would say is you can't brand your way out of bad policy. So if as a government and as a society...
That's just such a shame, isn't it? I talk to our branding people. Come on, you can get us out of trouble, right? No.
Are these things that we have going for us? Absolutely. That we can celebrate as Australian businesses and be more deliberate around articulating them when we're trying to sell more products to the international market. So first of all, the domestic market is too small, Australia. If we're ever going to grow our economy, repay our debt, we need to
We have to be an
be part of the global. Yeah, correct. Food and agriculture is definitely one area, but it is at the premium end of the offering, because of all of those quality and standards. So in terms of diversifying across the other sectors, obviously our biggest export still continues to be in the energy and mining sector, and we need to be evolving that into more of the renewable space. So the idea there from a branding perspective is, yes, the rest of the world knows that we dig a lot out of our ground. We're a mineral-rich country and we sell it to the world. But if we can shift that towards our clever ways that we can integrate our green mining techniques, our leadership in solar energy in the renewable sector, it's about leveraging what we're currently known for and taking it somewhere new. So yes, we've got beautiful beaches, but that means we also have a great knowledge around ocean protection and oceanography. Or yes, we have, in the sports sector, yes, we've got great athletes and a beautiful country in which they can compete, but we also have amazing sports science, sports medicine.
Yeah, and we
so
can
it's
export
stretching.
That, right? It's just like the
stretching
Indian
the categories.
The Indian cricket team, you can tell I'm a cricket fan, adopted the sort of high performance training academy model of the Australians in India, right?
It's been copied many times.
Many
around
times,
the world.
and why did they do that? Because in India it was all about natural talent.
Yes,
it was never about
which there's a place for that too.
Yeah, absolutely. They're extremely talented, right? But
and with a population as deep as what they have in India, you can almost afford to accidentally discover the right talent will rise to the top. But Australia needs to be more deliberate in its sporting system because we just don't have that depth of talent. We just don't have the numbers. For every one Australian athlete, I think there's 300 in China. So you need to be more considered and deliberate around where you invest in infrastructure and athletes and how you support athletes to achieve their dream, because it's not the numbers game competing with other countries.
But just taking a quick step back to the green thing.
Yes,
so I mean, I think it's a fascinating point you make, because I think the politics of Australia has largely been around the climate change debate. We've got to do something, we've got to do something to keep, to improve our environment, to reduce our emissions. The company here, Lend-Lease, that I work for, we have clear commitments on net zero. We have a clear commitment on absolute zero. We're one of the few, I think, real estate companies that have been quite open about this, and we're serious about it. This is a carbon neutral precinct. The next precinct we build like this will be an absolute zero precinct. That's the sort of plan we're aiming for. We don't necessarily have all the answers how to get there yet, but we're working on it. That's the sort of export opportunity that is there for Australia. So your point about energy is fascinating as well, in the sense that.
But just before you move on that, Jason, I mean, that's precisely an exercise in nation branding, because what Lend-Lease has been able to do is world class. It is a leader in bringing places and sustainability to placemaking, and you're able to. It's that skill and that Australian approach of understanding people and places that have combined to build that expertise. And exactly, you can now sell that to Google, who choose to use you to create their headquarters.
Yeah.
That's an Australian company that is competing with the world to design a place for one of the most progressive companies in the world.
Absolutely.
Like, that's an example of nation branding, where Australia is taking on the world and showing the world our full capabilities beyond beaches and cuddly koalas. So I commend Lend-Lease and the work you do, because we have these clever, incredible people. That's one of our greatest assets, and sharing that with the world in the export world, services sector, is going to continue to be our growth sector.
Well, I know our team would appreciate that. Right? Certainly the international expansion of this company has been amazing. And it is the ability to move into Asia from a development perspective. It's not an easy market to compete in yet. In Singapore, we've been there since the 70s or something, right? So it is the same in the US. and same in the UK. There is a lot of innovation in this firm, which is why I sort of enjoy being here and doing the sort of things that we do. But just quickly on the energy thing before I lose it.
Yes.
I love the idea of evolving from, resources in the ground towards creating a new resource stock for Australia via green hydrogen.
Yes.
And in fact, my last guest on this podcast was somebody who's a lawyer looking at green hydrogen. I asked him, "Is this thing real?" And we went through it all. And I think there is a really huge opportunity that we missed with the solar age to actually create the sort of network effect of green hydrogen production, not just for Australia, but then implement that globally and say to other countries, okay, we can produce this stuff, we can export it, we can show you how a net zero economy really works on this and transition from coal-fired power stations to green hydrogen power stations if that's possible. Do it in the transportation sector. The transport sector is one of the few sectors in Australia that actually has risen with its emissions, as opposed to lots of other sectors which have fallen. Why? Because we are still a very large country with a very large landmass, and you still need to move stuff around. And if anything, this period of pandemic and other factors have led to a sort of supply chain rethink, where really we're moving into this idea of the just-in-case supply chain as opposed to the just-in-time supply chain, right?
Correct.
So things like urea, for example, like I'd never heard of this thing, AdBlue, that goes into, to reduce the emissions from diesel trucks, right? We didn't produce the stuff. Now we do. Our supply of urea came from another country. Now we're producing it ourselves because we've got to keep things moving. Like, there's going to be more and more cases of this in the short term. I just wonder in the longer term, that's creating more density of industry that will lead to another outward look into our core markets in the future.
Well, it will, because it's easy for people to connect Australia as being a reliable provider of energy. Like, fundamentally, what I need is to be able to put my lights on in Kazakhstan. What are my options to do that, and where does Australia play into the global game? So we're already in the game and have a seat at the table of the energy sector.
So they see us as an energy supplier in some of our markets, key markets.
Many markets, yes, they know, but usually the historical ones. So what you're absolutely right, the green and renewable and hydrogen sector is nothing but growth. And I know New South Wales governments and other governments around Australia, as well as private sector, are investing heavily for that reason. But if you take two markets, Japan and South Korea, if we were to provide and supply hydrogen to those two markets, we're tapped out. Like, we only need to do those two markets, and like, we're there. So we've got to be targeted, and it's not about scattergun approach. Be targeted. What's the right priority market, priority sector, which is the work that Austrade, Australian Trade Investment Commission, does in looking at. Let's make sure we look at the demand side, not just the supply chain. Hi, we're little Australia down here, and we've got stuff to flog. Who wants it? No, where is there generally?
I've got this impression of steak knives.
Yeah. Like, who wants a steak knife? Exactly.
Who wants a steak knife?
We're more sophisticated than that, and let's be considered about that. And often we're not going to compete on price because it is premium price, but people need to attach a value to a commodity or a good being Australian, and then associate that with good things. And that's part of the work in branding. It's the narrative, it's the stories we tell, it's the proof points we have of the lend leases, the hydrogen, all the stories that help shape and inform people's views of Australia, so that when they come to a point in their sector or their career that they need to make a decision to choose an external company or country from a country to help deliver what they need to deliver, then Australia is in that consideration set. And that's one of the challenges we have. As a country, it's not like we don't have high favourability or high likeability. We generally are liked, and people have a favourability to Australia. Our issue is relevance in a global market. They just don't think. Like, we're a bloody long way away. We're in an inconvenient time zone. Like, kind of, why would I consider? And I didn't know that Australia did that because I thought they had beautiful beaches and cuddly cute koalas.
This is why
it's the relevancy piece. Yeah.
And getting out to market is so important. And I find that when we have a Japanese office, a lot of our capital comes from Asia you have to go there.
Yep.
You have to go there. You have to meet them. You have to
It's
sit down with them.
relationships based, yeah.
Right, and they have to come here, right?
Yeah, and understanding those cultural nuances is equally important as the data and the statistics. So yes, you can have the data, but how you actually do business is different, and people are driven by different things. So even in the work that we were doing when we're looking at logos and colours, and the Japanese don't like lots of bling and ostentatious.
Yeah.
So we were going in the premium end and had metallic gold, and it's like that's actually probably not going to work so well in Japan, where like bling bling is not the thing, but in China it's totally fine.
Yeah, it's a totally thing. Yeah.
So obviously, like human
I didn't
beings,
think about that. How does it actually cross-cultural impact of the brand?
How do you get something to work for all sectors in everywhere in the world? It's not easy.
Was the sort of I remember people saying, "Oh, well, what's wrong with the boxing kangaroo?" That's very much a domestic brand, right? It's very much an Australian. No one will understand what that is.
It's a rallying cry for Australians from the 80s with America's Cup. So it had its place at a point in time, and it is. It's something we domestically resonate with. But the trick with nation branding or branding anything is it has to be invitational in nature. It's not about Australia bragging, "Hi, we're magnificent."
Yeah.
It has to be what's in it for me, for the other country. It needs to be inclusive and invitational, that here's what you'll stand to gain or benefit from coming and playing with us. Which is actually something that does work in our favour. Very often when companies do business, if they do it once, there's a strong repeat business, because we generally work well in international environments because of our multicultural, kind of society. We're pretty, easygoing and able to be thrown into a melting pot of all different nationalities and disarming and get it done. There's a pragmatism that comes.
The get it done part of Australia.
The get it done
is so
is, yeah.
Isn't it? You just get
so
it
if
done.
we can get organisations to work with or buy from Australia once, then there's a high repeat rate, which is an asset.
I will tell this story because it goes to this sort of cultural understanding. So when we go to Japan, we spend a lot of time with our customers and clients there. And our head of our Japanese office is an Australian who's been in Japan for, I think, 18 years, speaks Japanese now better than his English, I think. Well, he's from Melbourne, so, so he has that sort of Melburnian accent to the Japanese, I think. But married a Japanese lady, and he's completely immersed in Japanese culture, which is such an asset to us, because when we go there, it means that we can adjust quickly. But when they come here, and our Japanese customers come here, they love to go out for dinner, and it will always be Australian produce, steak, wine, and it's always, for some reason, kangaroo. There is this view that somehow that we are. Kangaroo is a staple diet in Australia, and it's quite hard to find a restaurant that serves kangaroo.
I'm not sure you can find kangaroo in downtown Tokyo. So
I don't think you can. But anyway, it always makes me laugh.
But same when you go to Switzerland, you eat their chocolate.
Well, quite. So just back on the brand for a second, and we'll make sure in the podcast we'll display the brand clearly and put links to it and whatever, so people can see it. But I did love the I guess nod to our indigenous heritage as a country in the logo, and I think that's really important for us as a country. And I think that's actually one of our selling points as a country is the fact that we have, one of the oldest surviving cultures in history. Just tell me a little bit about that. Why was that important?
Yeah, so it was very deliberate from day one that I saw this as an opportunity for us to have a new conversation, a relationship with our Indigenous Australians. Like, there's much that has been done, but there is still so much to be done. So it simply was the right thing. And also internationally, people love and are curious about our Indigenous stories. So why wouldn't I use this as a platform upon which we can tell that? It makes good, commercial sense as well as domestically. So we worked with an Indigenous agency from the beginning, the same agency that did the painting of the Qantas planes, actually. So they represent a real diversity of Indigenous Australians. And it was a beautiful process. So yes, they were involved in the early designs pre-COVID, when we were looking at wattle being a part of our, we wanted to imbue and tell the world a new story. So let's do that through a new vessel with a new narrative. The Kiwis have the fern, the Canadians have the maple leaf. Like, there's lots of examples around the world.
And we have the kangaroo.
We had the kangaroo, yeah. But our native flower was wattle. So we did work with them on the Indigenous dot paintings, but you do dot paintings in the shape of a wattle and you do get a likeness to a coronavirus.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Exit stage left and start again. But you learn things, you learn things along the way.
Well,
And then
how are you to know that a virus will
global
take over the
pandemic.
entire
I know.
world?
Well, the funny thing is we did market testing, and you always do misattribution across a bunch of different countries to say, well, what does this actually look like in another country? Is there something we're not familiar with? It's really fascinating research. So we did that with our little wattle mark, and the misattribution for a virus was like 0.1% at the time, yeah? But pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic.
So it's like not an issue, not an issue. I think we got dandelions, we got like different things, but it wasn't even.
Dear.
So how the context changes in the world, and any branding, you need to be conscious of how that works. Someone like Corona beer has also been impacted by it. Like, it's random. So our project was the same. Back to the drawing board. There was a strategic.
There's a big beer theme going through this podcast.
Yeah. Someone who doesn't drink beer, seriously.
Me either these days. Not that much anymore.
No. So there was a very strategic discussion: to rue or not to rue.
To rue or not to rue?
Correct. Do we go kangaroo, tried and tested, or do we go a new path? And the world changed with coronavirus, so we needed to change accordingly. And our kangaroo, love him or hate him, he's most instantly recognisable, shortcut to Australia, the world over. So we came back to the roo, but we wanted it to be a modern, contemporary roo that did imbue still that story of the Indigenous heritage. So it's made up of 3 Indigenous boomerangs, 1 ceremonial, 1 for hunting and foraging, and the third one just for digging. Which is this beautiful elder of the tribe that we worked with, and a younger emerging leader. It was just a beautiful process, and I would commend that you look at there's a 30-second brand that tells the story behind the boomerangs and the people and the representation that it symbolises. But it is designed to be a modern, contemporary take on our kangaroo that's forward facing.
Yeah, and I felt that looking at it. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be such a good, positive, modern representation of our country.
Well, a fun fact is, I think 28.9% of global searches annually in relation to Australia is the word, guess.
Kangaroo.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah.
It's such a unique animal.
We may or may not kind of relate to it, but it's how the world views us. So let's leverage that and lean into it.
My now 8-year-old, just another silly story, but when I was doing one of my degrees, I lost a bet that a team would win the Football World Cup. I actually don't remember which one it was. I had to then present in front of the class in a kangaroo suit.
Oh my goodness.
And so they bought this kangaroo suit. I had to sing the Australian national anthem. And so I had to do this. And then it had a Joey, right, in this suit. Embarrassment over, a couple of years went by. My oldest daughter, who was then
You're lucky
2,
social media wasn't available.
Well,
still, like,
it probably
on the
is,
internet.
probably things. But anyway, she discovered the Joey, and it became her toy, her car toy.
Oh my goodness.
So every car trip, she had to have this.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. Which of course the name was very, very complicated name, kangaroo.
Kangaroo.
Yeah.
Roo.
There you go.
So we had similar, you think that was embarrassing. We had little bets that went on between the British and the Aussies in the Olympic Village. So we had little ashes, between our athletes and them and the officials. We had little side bets. But we had like the leaders of each of the teams, called chef de missions, made these little side bets whether we're going to win something or not. And the loser of particular bets meant that the English had to dress up in our boxing kangaroo, in the dining hall and sing Australia's national anthem. And if our chef de mission lost, he had to stand up and sing "Oh Rose," the English national anthem, no costume. So the English lost.
Sounds
on
like
that
an
occasion.
unfair bet.
Yeah, I know, to begin with. So we had dressed head to toe the English chef de mission. It was like,
oh, very good.
A heap of fun. So your public humiliation was perhaps not as bad as others that have been forced to do that.
Anyway, but it's one I remember clearly. But actually, that's a great segue then into sort of the Olympics, right? So I think the brand, I think we can understand why we need one, right? Like it makes sense. We've talked a lot about trade. So now we've got Brisbane 2032. It's a fascinating time to be doing an Olympic Games, in this period of time. I think my outlook on it is that public finances are more strained than ever before globally. The pandemic has intensified that more than, and we were already in sort of some precarious financial positions globally. So I'm really interested in the sort of Olympic movement's view of this in terms of the sustainability of games. And I mean this not just from an environmental sustainability point of view, which is fascinating, but also an economic sustainability point of view. And if you think of our general pitch of an Olympic Games, through the histories has been, you do this, you get a place outcome, you get an economic outcome, you get a jobs outcome. It's good for your country if you get it. Quite a few examples where that hasn't quite played out. In fact, very few games have really resulted in sort of a positive economic value for countries, even if the social value has been important. How do we view the Olympics for 2032? What are we going to do to make sure it delivers for Queensland? And I should put this in context. This Olympic Games is deliberately in Queensland. It's Queensland, Brisbane, and Southeast Queensland. So this is an economic development opportunity for a very important part of our country. I think everyone's excited about it. How do we maximize it?
Okay, I'm not going to pretend to speak for the Brisbane 32 people or the
This
IOC,
is just you and
but
me
this is
talking
my
about it.
yeah, correct. In the time that I was involved with the Olympic movement, the IOC came to understand the sustainability challenge of how do you host this mega sporting event in different countries around the world when it costs so much. And that was a sustainability problem for the future of the Olympic Games. So they very deliberately took on the challenge of how do we make it easier in terms of the whole bid process, as well as to allow smaller cities to be able to host games by kind of revisiting the requirements that host cities needed to do. So yes, you are starting to see cities that can share with, you can spread the sporting infrastructure across a larger geography, such that you can even have it in different countries.
Japan, South Korea for the World Cup, for example.
Correct,
right? Yeah.
Which I think makes it more sustainable in the economic sense. But importantly then around the delivery of actually the sport infrastructure. So there's three themes that any Olympic host city really has to be deliberate around creating a vision. One is the financial sustainability issue. Two is the environmental sustainability issue. If the IOC is about making the world a better place, having a huge carbon footprint as a consequence of hosting the Games isn't really aligned with that. And the third is around the social impact or social sustainability. What are the change? How do you want this to be a magnifier for change? Because you have a deadline, you have a date, it can have this galvanizing effect of getting shit done that's otherwise quite difficult to do in a political or different environment. So economic, environmental and social impact, they're the three themes. So financial sustainability, Brisbane's bid currently contemplates, I think it's 85 or 95 of the venues are existing venues. So by reducing the need for additional infrastructure and allowing people to to renovate and change the requirements of where different sports can compete and the training environments, it lowers that entry point for different cities. And Brisbane is one such city that enjoys extraordinary infrastructure between Brisbane, Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast. We are blessed with beautiful sporting facilities in Queensland, and we're able to leverage that across a broader footprint. So I know that all of those that are involved in the Queensland bid are committed to leveraging existing infrastructure as much as possible. But you also want to use it as a legacy to accelerate the broader public interest infrastructure. So they've been talking for a long time about getting a high-speed train from Brisbane to the Gold Coast or Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast. And this gives the Queensland Government the opportunity to put that in place and a deadline by which it needs to be complete in a world of competing priorities, for which all Southeast Queenslanders will enjoy for many years to come.
So there is an actual post-Games dividend.
It has to be part of a city or a region's broader plans, and it just can accelerate or magnify and enhance an existing plan. And I think Brisbane has for a long time, it's a very attractive place. I obviously come from there with a strong migration
My boss,
population.
Del Connor, is a Queenslander, so I have to be very nice to Queensland.
Yes, you should be. You should be. It's a beautiful place.
The Maroons are a rugby team, right? Is that what they are?
let's not go there.
Anyway, sorry, I digress.
No. So
Yeah.
that financial sustainability is alive and well, both at the IOC and certainly the basis upon which Brisbane made its bid, that it was not to cost Queensland taxpayers a significant or extraordinary amount, nor to pay for venues and facilities that will never be used after the Games. So more flexibility around temporary venues. I think they're contemplating that we could compete, the rowing could happen in Sydney using the Sydney 2000 venues, depending on the costs of them upgrading and doing some different rowing up there. So that's the financial sustainability piece. I think for Brisbane, it really is a great opportunity to shine a spotlight on our environmental standards and capabilities in that offering. We're talking about the shift where Australia wants to be known for our renewable green capability. Well, what better way to do it than when the rest of the world is looking at Australia through the lens of a sporting event, and they can see that the fields are grown with fully recyclable water, that the chairs are all made from recyclable rubber, that the food and beverage is 100% biodegradable, componentry to the food, and showcasing Australian food and agriculture. Like, it is a prism by which the rest of the world gets to see Australia in a highly emotive state.
It goes back to what you were saying about the brand,
which
right?
drives preference and choice, and the ability to pay for.
And then all of a sudden, you sort of see the linkage between the definition of a unifying brand and a sort of a major event,
and seeing it come to life.
Yeah.
It's exactly it.
Yeah.
So that's a sustainability part. I see it as Australia actually does have strong capability in that space. Let's showcase that to the world for future trade investment outcomes. And the third, of course, is a social impact. This has to have a positive impact on Queenslanders and on all Australians. And I think any of us who are fortunate, my lived experience included, the inspiration effect that an Olympic Games has on younger generation.
Absolutely. That's something we haven't really covered.
Is
right?
something you can never put a price on. I think I love to speak to the athletes, in Olympic Village, and just hear their stories of how they came to do their sport. Like, how did you come here? Yeah. And probably, I want to say 8 out of 10 of them, their Olympic dream was fielded when they watched it on TV, somewhere between 6 and 10 years old. They saw someone else, an Aussie, win a medal and went, I want to do that.
I want to do that.
And that moment, you cannot put a price on what that does to change the future leaders of this country. And I think that's a worthwhile endeavour. So yes, there's that from a sports perspective, but there's a social impact that hosting a Games will bring to this country opportunities that we wouldn't otherwise get. So how do we include, those that are not well integrated into our society, those that are disadvantaged? Our Paralympians are a huge part of any Olympic program, and I feel remiss in talking deeply about the Olympics and not
without
Paralympics.
talking about the Paralympics. Actually, I wanted to get to that too as well.
But that is the opportunity that Brisbane can do, because I think we do have some really good platforms upon which we are an open and inclusive society, and we can integrate that in a far more deliberate manner for the rest of the world to learn.
So it's actually a good opportunity to talk about design and development in an Olympic setting. So some of the things we're thinking about is, the Sydney 2000 was an example of where the Athletes' Village was created and is now a residential suburb.
Yes.
Right? It wasn't just created for a temporary purpose. So how do you design an Athletes' Village that works as an Athletes' Village and then transitions into a residential suburb? That's going to be a question for Brisbane, which is, if you're going to be able to create an excellent place that facilitates Brisbane's growth as a city.
Correct.
That's one angle. Another angle is, we know that there's going to be, you mentioned renovation of infrastructure. We know there's going to be new builds of things. There's going to be new infrastructure of things. What is the manufacturing ability or capability that, potentially you could go in there? So one idea we're playing with, for example, is, could we find a way of working on projects that lead us to use Queensland suppliers that will then allow them to scale up to meet the Games needs, but then potentially go further on? And could we use our digital capability that we're developing here via our digital twin, the Podium digital twin, or the concepts we have around sort of an integrated supply chain come into being for the Brisbane 22 Olympics? Is this a thing?
My goodness. So I think back to the way in which a digital twin would have just changed my life if I was able to visually play with different concepts of where I put my office and where I use the accommodation and the comings and goings of different people. Like, it's a game changer in terms of efficiency. And the Olympic Games is all about scale and efficiency, which is where things like a digital twin would just be invaluable. So the technology that we have in this country and access to globally, we need to apply it to do it better, smarter and more efficiently than ever before. We've got the opportunity to do that.
And that's also an export opportunity. If we can use Brisbane
done well.
to be, well, that's right. So where I was going was, well, if Sydney 2000 was a platform for what,
at that time,
for what the best Olympics could be.
Yes.
And that, we
famously
dined out
declared.
on that. We dined out on that for some time.
We did. Probably till about London 2012, I reckon.
Right, probably. And so surely Brisbane 22 is that, 32
Correct.
is
it's
that
the next North Star.
Opportunity. I like that phrase, the next North Star. And I think here we're just kind of trying to think about, the standard procurement of construction that will all happen.
Yes.
Right? How do you integrate that to get a maximum economic outcome? And certainly the executive governments are thinking this way. The Prime Minister, the Premier of Queensland, they were quite explicit in the reason why this is a joint venture between the Commonwealth and state governments.
Absolutely.
Is to actually yield a strong economic jobs dividend for the people of Queensland and Australia. And I think as corporates and and as agencies that look at this, between our two various agencies, that's something we've got to be more focused on. We've got a bit of time to think about it.
Well, we do and we don't. Like, yes, it's actually a 20-year chapter in Australia's history, economic history, because you've got the 10 years between now and Brisbane, and then you have about the 10 years after. Like, let's be real about people's memories and impact and yada, yada. Yeah. So it creates this nice bookend between those 2 decades. So between now and then, we're hosting 10 other international sporting events in the lead up to Brisbane, so some global.
Which are good trial events, right, for things that we're testing.
Well, they're a good platform upon which we could build a consistent narrative to then solidify and then, really nail and be in our full tilt by the time Brisbane comes around. Not wait till Brisbane, then here we are, we're kind of good at this. No, let's build that narrative.
We're going to sell it up front.
And we also have the opportunity when the rest of the world is coming. And you've got this desirability effect sometime between after LA 28, leading up to Brisbane 2032, where you're going to have all the countries that want an excuse to come here because they want to find, access to training facilities, they want to find on-the-ground support for, uniforms and lodgings for extra officials that don't stay in the village. Like, there's a whole economy that occurs outside of the Olympic bubble that Brisbane has the opportunity to benefit from.
I didn't even think of that.
But so does Australia. Yeah. But you also need to go, well, what's the CEO summits around hydrogen that we also want to showcase, because it's under the guise of an excuse of.
And then there's that whole business part of the Olympics.
The business, right? Absolutely.
Which Austrade obviously facilitates so brilliantly.
Yeah.
That's critical.
And so I think, the same way, you sometimes need an excuse to go to a new country. Yeah. So the reason, think of your last holiday. Did you have an excuse to go there? For me, it's like I pick a running event where I want to go. Like, you kind of need a reason. You don't just wake up and go, I'm going to go to Australia when you live in Europe. So you need to give the world an excuse to come here. And yes, the Olympics and other major sporting events does that, certainly from a tourism perspective. But whilst they're here watching a sporting event or being part of it, let's accidentally inform them of the broader capabilities that Australia has from a business perspective, because people often aren't just tourists, they're tourists that have a job back home in a particular sector. So how do we leverage these to actually drive that broader trade and investment outcome for Australia in the lead up to then and on full tilt at Brisbane Olympics? And you've seen some cities do it better than others in terms of the pre-event. Many people talk about the legacy after the event and then go, okay, we're kind of open for business, we've kind of got all these things. But for me, the ambition is in the what we can do between now and then to start to build that narrative. So Brisbane, represents a proof point of our capabilities, and then we can continue.
And I think that pre-event, so it's really about building a coalition of the willing, between government and the private sector.
Yes.
who want to come together to actually make this a success, right? That's
And
certainly
that's
our view of these
correct. And that's the magic of what a games does, is it provides that deadline, that full stop. Differences aside, we need to agree, and it has that galvanizing effect to say, you know, we want this to be the most magnificent event, and we're aligned in that vision. So let's figure it out. Let's figure out our differences. Let's make it happen.
Let's make it happen. Then just quickly on the Paralympics, I think that actually is the accessibility is something Australia does extremely well. I mean, I know we don't always feel that way, but I've had a couple of people on the podcast talk about, you know, what accessibility is like in other countries, including one of my colleagues, Richard Kupasamy, who is who's in our Asian business, and he talks about what life in a wheelchair is like in Singapore and how he's driving change in his home country. And you kind of think, well, that's really an opportunity for us to think about, you know, better accessibility and design of buildings. And, you know, he tells stories, and my other colleague, Helen Lamb, tells stories about, you know, when we design buildings, you know, making the architect sit in a wheelchair and say, well, can you actually access that door? You've designed it, you've said it's accessible. You sit in a chair and go up there and see if it works.
Try,
or
yeah.
You try and be blind and walk up there, right? So, and just, it sounds almost silly, right? You know, you blindfold them and say, have a go. But maybe that's what it takes, right?
No,
So
it
think
is.
the technology angle here helps as well with how do you actually create accessibility in, not just in accessing venues, but to take it even further and being able to experience the games if you're not at the venue. I think we talked earlier just about
Correct.
Japan, you know, first of all, being able to host an Olympics during the pandemic. Only the Japanese really could have pulled that
My
off. That was
goodness.
extraordinary
Yeah.
experience. And I was thrilled for them that they came third in the medal tally because they deserved it. But the fact that the technology angles, you could watch any sport you could want from any angle at any time. And it was the same for the Olympics and the Paralympics. All of a sudden, the Paralympics became more accessible than ever before because of this way, and the Olympics sort of became more accessible than ever before to the world. And so I think that's another angle for Brisbane. You know, I think Japan sort of showed the way.
I absolutely agree. And so 2 observations. One, we would always generally have the Paralympic Australian team inherit our space in the Olympic Village. So we left all our flags and our signage and those spaces, but we always had to be conscious of which were the accessible rooms, because not every post-games apartment is going to be
accessible.
Wheelchair accessible, just based on the numbers and demographics. So we always were very considered about that in our planning, but it's not easy, and you don't know what you don't know. They're administered. Correct, they're administered by different organisations. In other countries, they're the one organisation that does both. But simply said, by the time you've done the Olympics, you're actually exhausted. You've worked 20-hour days, and it's actually not fair to those athletes to expect the same kind of leadership. So I do think having a different leadership works. They often say we were the test event, the warm-up event for them. And by then we've often ironed out all the problems. The showers now work and the plumbing is fixed. But no, so we worked very closely with the Paralympics, you know, at that practical level. And I didn't know what I didn't know before having that experience. And everyday Australians can't appreciate the daily challenges that not only those athletes overcome, but anyone with a disability of a physical or any other limitation on their abilities, that how they just operate in everyday society. So certainly I appreciate the eye-opening experiences that I had. One thing I would commend to anyone listening to this is to see, if you haven't, the movie Phoenix Rising. It came out, it was a documentary about just after Rio, and it talks through, I think, 3 or 4 stories of Paralympic athletes. It is extraordinary. I swear you will never complain about anything in your life after watching this video, but it shows the stories Paralympians have to tell are deeper and richer than any Olympian. And they should be heralded as the heroes that they are, equally, if not more so, than the pedestals upon which we put our Olympic athletes, because the adversity, you talk about adversity and resiliency and the attributes athletes need to carry, well, like Paralympians are next level. So I think for Brisbane to shine a light on shifting the narrative of disabled athletes and disabled people or disadvantaged we've got this wonderful opportunity, and if anyone can do it, I think we can.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
That's a nice point to sort of say we're probably running out of time, and I think we could probably go for another few hours. But normally I like to sort of ask guests, to sort of sum up in sort of 3 things they would like us to see, 3 things that that we need to challenge ourselves with. So we've just launched Brand Australia, our nation brand. We've got a bunch of things to look forward to in this country. What would you like us to achieve? What are the 3 things that you want us to drive for?
I think I'm going to start with being more deliberately proud of who we are as Australians and what we have to offer the world. We're naturally going to be humble in our approach. We're not braggy, all about me, but we do, if we want to be known for more, we need people to know that. So we'll do that in our affable, disarming, informal way, continue to do that, but don't be shy about celebrating the success of Australian companies and industries and what we do. I would say we carry this irrepressible sense of optimism in the world, and Aussies can be counted on to endure and overcome whatever challenges come our way, and history has taught us that. I think the world can do with that right now in our political environment.
I agree.
And the third, I would say, is bringing it back to where we started my conversation, pop quizzing you on what you thought about other countries, is when we are talking about Australia and our place in the world, is to be a little more deliberate around our people and our place, but also don't shy away from our products and services and capabilities. So very often people will relate to the people and place, but don't forget our product in the broader sense of the word, products, services, capabilities, because we have an extraordinary amount to offer the world, and I'd certainly like to see us maximise that, which we will do.
I completely agree with all of that. I think we have so much potential, and congratulations on Australia's brand. I can't imagine the amount of work that must have gone into
you don't want to know.
It there, but it's out now, and of course, I wish you all the best, and everyone's behind you. Fiona de Jong, thank you so much for being part of the podcast.
Absolute pleasure, Jason. Thank you.